Hello, this is another very interesting episode of In Conservation with. My name is David Lindo. I'm also known as the Urban Birder. And tonight, this afternoon, we are going to be talking about birding with disabilities, a subject which I don't think gets any hearing at all, actually, any hearing at all. It should be out there, and we should be talking more about this because it affects a lot of people. Tonight, we're going to be talking to several different people. Virginia Rose, who is the founder of Birdability, which is an American charity which caters for birders with disabilities. Paul Miller, um, another guy called Eric Clow, Michael Herben, and my good friend from England, Bo Bueland, who actually I've known for about 20 years, I've been told. And he also runs a really interesting organization looking after and looking out for people with disabilities. Now, if you're watching this for the first time and you're watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe and tell all your friends, because there's so much information out there on this particular channel. It's on the urbanbirderworld.com. It's my website, and also the Urban Birder World YouTube channel. So please check in and actually find out more. Okay, so we're going to start this evening with Virginia, and I've only met Virginia online. I've seen some of the work that she's done, but I'd like you to kind of get to know her with me. So Virginia, good afternoon to you. Where are you and how are you?
Good afternoon, and thank you so much, David, for having us. I live in Austin, Texas, and I've been here now for about 25 years, and this is home.
Beautiful. I've been to Texas a couple of times, but never Austin actually. So I must wend my way there one day.
Yes, you must, before Austin secedes from the state.
Now you are the founder of Birdability. Could you explain what Birdability is about?
Sure. To your earlier point, I had been birding for 20 years, and let me back up. I was paralyzed in a horseback riding accident when I was 14, and I used a manual wheelchair since then. And I started birding when I was 44. And after years and years of birding with a bunch of walking people, I realized there are no disabled people on these trails. Where are they? And after I retired from 140 years of teaching, I decided that I needed to go find the disabled people and introduce them to birding. So basically in 2018, that's when it all started for me, is to go find them. The mission is introduce people to birding who have disabilities. Second part of the mission is to ensure that birding locations are accessible. Third part of the mission is to make sure that birding communities are welcoming and inclusive.
And do you think, in terms of the last point, birding communities being inclusive and welcoming, is that the case?
Oh, I think it is not yet the case. Some organizations are all over it and have been before I discovered them. And others are so eager to learn. People are coming at me constantly by email, by phone even, and asking, what can we do? What can we do? Tell us what we need to do in order to be welcoming. And they may not even know to use those words, but we are teaching them. We are reaching them. We are doing 2 or more presentations a month. And in those presentations, we are helping these organizations understand what access really means. We are helping them understand where we can find these disabled potential birders. And we're showing them language to use and language not to use, and practices on field trips that help people with disabilities feel safe.
Okay, and what, in terms of access, what do people need? I mean, as an able-bodied person, you often don't really. It's not a deliberate thing. You just don't think of
Right,
people that may not have that ability you have.
right, exactly. And to your point, I can only know my lived experience, David, which is as a paraplegic in a manual chair. I've been in my chair for 50 years. So I can tell you a lot about what I need, but I can't tell you anything about what Michael might need or what Eric might need or what Bo or Paul might need. And this is the key. We cannot pretend to know what all these disabilities need. So the key is to get information from them, asking them for their testimonies. What do you need? What do you need? And then we take that information and we put it into our access considerations, and it's reflected then on our site checklists so that all kinds of disabilities are recognized. But here's the most important point of all: not one of us can be an expert on all the disabilities. There's no way to do that. So the goal is to make sure that we are providing enough information for all the disabilities to be able to recognize, is this a site that works for me? Does this site have the access for my particular disability? And that way, all of those various folks with all those various disabilities get to make their own decisions. And we are not put in the position of trying to know all of them.
Yeah, so obviously it's not a case of one size fits all. I mean, obviously
Right.
there's so many variations. What advice would you give? I mean, I've watched. I've been looking at social media recently, and I've noticed there's in my feed for some reason there's lots of people doing stupid things like jumping off roofs. I saw one guy. He jumped off a house roof with his friend on his shoulders onto hard concrete, and obviously when he landed, he was in severe pain, and he was doing that just for the sake of getting likes. Um, People often don't realize the thin line between 1 minute being okay and the next minute, having a disability for the rest of your life. And that obviously happened to you when you're horse riding. I mean, I guess that was a sudden thing, wasn't it?
Yes, I was riding and my horse spooked and he ran into guy wires. And those are the wires that attach the top of the telephone pole to the ground. And he obviously did not see them. He ran into them. I fell off and landed in such a way as to break my back and paralyze me. So, I have always been amazed that it can take 1 second of judgment to make a difference in the rest of one's life. I still sometimes I re-encounter that and I'm like, what? 1 second can make the difference? And it's like, yes, 1 second can make the difference. But I want to tell you something about my particular situation, which was that I was injured at age 14. And this was in 1973. And this was the era, David, of assimilation, not so much accommodation. And in my family, you did not ask for help. You figured things out on your own and you did not impose. That was the rule. And so what that means is I spent years and years figuring out how to live in a wheelchair. And now people are horrified that, there were no accommodations and that you weren't even brought up to ask for accommodations. And I totally understand that. And accommodations now are thankfully present for people so that they can move forward in their lives. But I will add that for the last, I don't know, 45 or so years, I never felt like a disabled person because I could do so much. I could do everything I felt like I wanted to do. And I think some of that has to do with the age at which I was disabled and having a family that was like, sorry, you're in a wheelchair, but no exceptions. I'm like, okay. So anyway, I guess the point I'm making is that I never felt like a disabled person because I could do so much until such time, like within the last few years, that my shoulders have said, okay, we're kind of done with this wheeling business. And so now I'm starting to feel a little more disabled and looking at the ways in which living as a disabled person is much more difficult, even though nobody else would look at me and say that I wasn't disabled for the last 50 years.
I mean, you may have been asked this question before, but it's the first time I've ever asked this question of anyone disabled. But if someone has freshly become disabled in your particular, situation, broken back and, being a paraplegic, what advice would you give? Because that must be such, especially if it happens late in life, it must be such a horrific thing to imagine.
It really is. And I attend a disabled support group at St. David's, primarily for the purpose of talking to people who are newly injured and giving them, some idea of what my experience was like. I honestly, to answer your question, David, I would say the most important answer I can give, and I think others will attest, is there is a huge empowerment in figuring things out. And it may be that you just figure out how to get a terracotta pot from one side of the patio to the other. But once having done that, man, I have a whole nother feeling about myself. It's like all of these little bitty accomplishments become huge. And I have what I call my empowerment necklace. And so every time I've done something that is so pleasing that I didn't know how to do it, I add it to the strand. And so what that means then, all of those empowerment beads compound and they create in me a confidence and a willingness and an ability to speak and present and try things because I'm succeeding.
That's fantastic. And what about birding? How does that make you feel?
Well, and that's exactly why I ended up feeling like my very best self. This is what I say when I do presentations. I was out birding, I was by myself and feeling I was surrounded by bird song. This was in the big thicket in East Texas. It was 7 a.m. And I was surrounded by bird song and I just thought I had this moment where I'm like, right now I am the happiest I've ever been and I am my best self. It was sort of this overwhelming feeling of this is exactly who I want to be. This person right here, right now. That's what birding did for me. And every time I went to a new birding site and I was able to manage whatever the difficulties happened to be, and I could at the end of the day say, I birded this place. I was here for 8 hours. I managed it. I found this many birds, and now I'm getting back in my van and calling it one of those days where I was just like so successful and so happy.
That's fabulous. Well, Virginia, listen, we'll come back to you because we've got a few more people to speak to today. But thank you so much for sharing your experience and sharing your wisdom and your enthusiasm. I mean, it's just amazing, really. Next up, I'd like to speak with Paul, Paul Miller. Hello, Paul. How are
Hi,
you?
David.
And where are you?
Good, good. I'm in California, Sacramento, California.
Okay, I've never been. Let me ask you what is your disability and how did it occur to you? How did it happen to you, should I say?
So I have a slowly progressive form of muscular dystrophy. The the name of it is FSHD. Excuse me. And I mentioned that because if anybody wants to follow me on Instagram, I'm the FSHD birder. And I've got a website, FSHD birder. So I learned that I had the dystrophy when I was 16. My older sister had it, it's congenital. And you remember I don't, maybe David, not you, but some of the other people, in high school, we had to do these standardized tests. And one of them was called the BARDIT. And I had no idea that I had dystrophy. I was fully capable. I was a very, rambunctious, 16-year-old. And I jump on the parallel bars and I go down and I couldn't get back up. I literally was stuck. And the coach is just yelling at me, get out of there. What are you doing? And so I went home crying at 16. And my older sister said, I think you have muscular dystrophy. So unlike Virginia, I have had many, many years of my life to prepare. I was fully capable. I've done so many different things. I didn't hold back. I remember I was watching Star Wars, and kind of like where Virginia was saying, there's moments, and I had watched it, and I had this feeling I need to conquer. And so I took up surfing. I've done skiing. I've done all the physical stuff, but only in the last 10 years have I been really impacted by the condition. So yeah, so that's kind of how I learned about it. And so right now I'm in a power wheelchair. I kind of go between a power wheelchair and a walker.
How do people treat you? How do people in the street treat you? Because sometimes when I'm walking down the street in England, or mostly in England actually, I notice that, especially younger people might take a look at someone as if they're odd. Do you ever get that at all?
Well, prior to being in a power wheelchair, it was more like I was using a walking staff. So I was the normal dude with the walking staff. But it's been very interesting ever since I've been in my power wheelchair. And I've got two different power wheelchairs. I've got an all-terrain power wheelchair that I've hooked my camera on, so it looks like this crazy contraption. So it's right down the gender line. Women don't even pay attention to anything that has to do with wheels and equipment, and they look me in the eyes, and I'm a person. But guys, and especially young boys, I'm not even there. It's all about my equipment. Oh my God, that's amazing. And what about this? And what about that? But it hasn't impacted me at all. I've appreciated so much since I've been in the power wheelchair, the generosity of people opening doors for me. If I go to the grocery store, can I reach this for you? And it's really buoyed my sense of humanity, that there are some very kind and wonderful people out there.
Well, that's very good to know. In terms of birding, how do you go about birding?
So I retired 8 years ago. I got invited out to a birding seminar that had field trips. I was still ambulatory with walking sticks, and I had my binoculars hanging around my neck, and I thought I could go out and use the binoculars. The first time I tried to use them, I couldn't reach to my eyes. So I think it was the German in me. I will find a way to use my binoculars. And so I came up, my poor wife, I came up with so many contraptions, and I finally mounted my binoculars on a monopod, but I realized once they were up in my eyes, I couldn't get my hand up there. I was like, oh great, I get my binoculars up there, but I can't focus them. So more boxes from China, and I built this electric focus. And of course that wasn't enough. And I built all these things, my poor wife. I built wheelchairs and I built supports, and it was crazy. So I Googled myself. I was like, are there any other crazy disabled birders? And I came across Virginia's website. I called Virginia and I said, okay, I need to give back. I've been cloistered up in my garage. My wife was ready to kick me out of the house. I've got to give back. I've recovered from my 25 years of traffic engineering. And she said, um, you should probably also get involved with Audubon, because that was a question that I had, should it just be birdability or Audubon? And so I reached out to Audubon, And within 2 years, I was president, and I've been president for 2 years. And I've been, it's like a full-time job, but it is so rewarding.
Do you, well, one of the things I was thinking about was the actual act of birding. Do you get frustrated when you can't, like, for example, for me, I don't, because I'm able-bodied, I just walk into a marsh or whatever. I don't think because I'm just on my own. But do you have, do you get sort of anxious or angry or whatever because you can't reach some parts that, due to access situations? Do you feel defeated by that?
No, and it's probably just my personality. So I'm actually delving into what they call slow birding or mindful birding. And that's my gig. That's what I really want to promote. I really want to pull people away from the obsession of listing and making sure they see specific birds to, I don't care if it's a pigeon in the city. Sit there and talk to the pigeon. And I mean talk. I mean wait for it to respond back to you. I mean, you were a puma in your past life. I think I was some type of medicine man. I mean, I probably had beads all over me because I'm trying to break through. I talk to my dogs and they understand me, but I'm trying to get to the point where I can talk to birds. So I never get frustrated. In fact, it's the opposite. When I lead a birding trip, I tell everybody the requirement is if you see or hear a bird and you like it, we're done. That's it. I don't care what bird it is. If we want to go deeper, we can go down that rabbit hole. We can ID the specific, genus, species, what year it is and where it came from and should it be here and why shouldn't it be here? But that's not my gig. So I don't get frustrated. Even if there's not any birds, I go out in the summer when it's 110 degrees in Sacramento and there's no birds, but I love the butterflies and the beetles.
You have such a positive attitude. It's incredible, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Because and again, I might sound ignorant, but if I was to come down with, with something like what you have or what have you now, I'm not sure how I'd be able to cope with that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I'd be as positive as you.
Well, I've said this to my sister. I never realized, and you never realize when you say things and it registers with people. So really, I encourage everybody that's listening to this, always speak from your heart, and you never know the audience that it's going to find purchase in. And I don't even remember saying this, but I remember telling my sister years and years ago, my dear sweet sister, that I actually see my disability as a gift because it challenges me, it moves me into places that I probably wouldn't have if I had a able body. And just within the last year, she says, I wrote that down, Paul, and it's in my drawer, and I open it up when I feel bad. So that it's like, okay, got it. Everything that we have is a gift if we're willing to embrace it and use it.
Fantastic words. Thank you, Paul. We'll come back to you a bit later, but
Thank you, David.
can we call up Eric Clow?
Hey there.
Hey, Eric. I can't see you for some reason. You got your camera sound on.
Can you hear me?
I can see you now. I got you now. Got you now. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So, Eric, how are you and where are you?
I'm doing well. Like Virginia, I'm in Austin, Texas this morning, where it's a lovely 75 degrees.
Oh, very nice.
I'm holed up in the garage right now. So,
Yeah, as I said to Virginia earlier, I've never been to Austin. I've been to Texas. I've been to the Rio Grande, the festival down there, and also,
beautiful.
yeah, that's about it really. Eric, can I ask you about your disability, please?
So I have another form of muscular dystrophy. My form of muscular dystrophy is called Becker's muscular dystrophy, which is also progressive. And so, I walked until I was 18 when I started using a wheelchair, though I could sort of use my wheelchair and walk. And when I got my first wheelchair, which was motorized, it was kind of like a superpower. It was like where before I had to trudge everywhere. Now I had this thing. I was zooming around at 6.5 miles per hour everywhere. And then so I've been using a wheelchair, pretty much full time since I was 18 until now I'm 36. And in the last, 5 to 10 years, I've been dealing with more muscle weakness. Uh, lately, the my big issue is with my arms, and I think it's because I use my arms for everything, and so yeah, I mean, it's causes progressive muscle weakness, um, increased fatigue and pain as I get older. One thing I have to be really mindful of is not to overexert myself. I have to, but also I can't not do nothing, so I've got to find that perfect balance between get enough exercise for my muscles so that they don't atrophy, but not do too much. Otherwise, they're gonna, get even more damaged.
And how does that work with birding? I mean, how do you go birding?
Well, I started birding just in the backyard. We had some bird feeders up and I just loved watching the birds visit the feeders. And then soon I kind of branched out from there and I got really obsessive about wanting to learn all the bird sounds. I want to learn all the calls and all the songs that were in the backyard in the neighborhood. So when I'm birding in the backyard, I don't use any binoculars. I don't use a scope or anything like that. Um, when I go out to parks or say to the ocean, things like that, I sometimes use an adapted scope, which I actually have courtesy of Paul, who's here on the call. I connected with him online um, and he said, all right, well, he asked me questions like, well, what's your wheelchair? And, do you have a desk on your wheelchair and things like that. So I actually have a scope setup that I use sometimes. But when I'm out in the field and I've got the scope, I can get really obsessive. I want to identify every single little bird that I see, and I'm panning to the left and I'm panning to the right, and I'm zooming in, focusing, and I can exhaust myself in about 10 or 15 minutes trying to get every bird. And so a lot of times when I go out, I thankfully have pretty decent vision. And, a lot of my birding looks like um, catching some distant bird and waiting until it gives me clues to find out what it is. Hopefully it sings a song, which makes things pretty easy for me, but other times I need to pay attention to its behavior or to where I am. Um, Recently, I spotted a vermilion flycatcher actually from the backyard, and it was, kind of late in the day, kind of cloudy, and so I, couldn't really see the color. To me, it was just a little black dot, right? But it was acting like a flycatcher. It was flying up 15 feet in the air, landing at the exact same perch. And when it landed lower so that there was some greenery behind it, I saw that bird is bright red, and then I, rolled all around the neighborhood to try to get to a view where the sun was behind me. And then I could see the bright red and I could see it was doing its flycatcher thing. And so that was an experience that was without any kind of optical aids, but it was no less thrilling, you know. So
Yeah,
I so and a lot of times I'm just birding by ear, that's one of my biggest joys.
yeah, because I was just thinking, you talking about birding without equipment, to me makes you an even better birder because you are actually using your senses and you are deducing, as you said, with the vermilion flycatcher. I guess that's a rare bird where you are, yeah?
It pretty uncommon, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's amazing that you actually use what you have to find these birds. Does it make you, I mean, you say you're in pain and stuff using your arms. Does it make you kind of forget your pain? Do you kind of get lost in this world and you kind of think, as you say, you come out, I guess you come out of yourself. Does that happen to you when you're watching nature?
Yeah, I think I definitely forget my pain in the moment when I'm birding. Where I remember the pain is when I'm on the way home, you know, and I'm like, oh man, I really overdid it. And but absolutely, birding is tremendously therapeutic and healing for me. And even to this day, my favorite place to bird really is the backyard, because I just sit there and the birds kind of come to me. Um and finding a new bird for in the yard, is one of the most exciting parts of birding. I think even more exciting than adding a bird to the life list is like, I've yet to see a great blue heron fly over the house, but if I did, even though I've seen that bird so many times, that would be absolutely amazing. And I would just be so excited by that.
What is your yard list like?
Well, right now it's probably around 57 or something like that. So not I know other birders in town who have 100 or 150, and I know that there will be more. I mean, the vermilion flycatcher was an absolute surprise. That was a bird I was not anticipating to get on the yard list, but it just showed up. And you know uh, and that's one of the, I don't know, one of the most exciting things about birding is you never know what you're going to get. There's always this sense of discovery when you're out someplace, and the universe decides what you see. You have no control over it.
Yeah, I mean,
um
yeah, anything can turn up anywhere at any time. That's the motto I used to, my sort of MO. I used to, in fact, still do lead my life with. And I remember looking at my backyard when I was a kid, um, and that was my world when I first started birding. I didn't have binoculars. I didn't know what the birds were called even. And I remember seeing one day in England and London, I saw a bird called a common redstart, which is a bird that normally you have to look for in woodlands in Wales or Scotland or someplace like that. And there was one hopping up my garden path. And for me, that was one of my best birding moments, despite the fact I've traveled the world, to see something on your own patch. No one else would see it because you're there in your garden, your yard, you're checking it out. It's fantastic.
Mhm.
What else do you do to fill your time?
Well, I write about birds actually quite a bit. Um, I recently launched a Substack after 2 or 3 years of um, just writing in my garage for a group of friends over email. And writing is one of the ways that actually deepened my relationship with birds. And um, because as I wrote about birds, I wanted to know more about the birds so that I could write about them more accurately. And so I think uh, to me, there's this relationship between birding and creativity. Um, I actually, my dictation just went haywire. If you could give me just 1 second. Go to sleep. Okay. I use dictation, and so I must have said something to activate it, and now it's
Yeah, yeah.
writing everything I say in front of me, and I can't see anyone's faces or anything. Okay, I'm back now. Thank you. Uh, so yeah, you know, I don't know if my love for birds would have deepened so quickly if I wasn't writing about them. And I found at the time when I was beginning this writing, I was just writing about what was going on in my day. This was largely during the pandemic. I had a daily journaling habit, and so I just found myself writing about birds consistently. That was the most interesting topic. And so, I'd write about them, and then the more I'd write about them, the more I'd want to learn about them, and the more I'd bird. And that's one of the that's one of my biggest joys, is writing about birds as well. Yeah.
Where can we see your writing?
Oh, it's at if you it's on Substack. The name of it is Bird City News, which I um yeah, I just launched somewhat recently. But I'm, one of the things too is when I was doing the writing is that I'd find that I was getting people excited about birds that hadn't been excited about birds. And so this became my mission kind of in life, was get more people excited about birds. And and it's funny because a lot of my friends now, whenever I see them, if it's been a little while, they'll say, "Hey, I saw a hawk in the backyard," or they always tell me their latest bird story. And so all my friends, they associate me with birds. I am birds. There's like no distinction. So, and that's kind of fun, yeah.
Yeah, fabulous. That's amazing. Thank you, Eric, for sharing that with us. Can I bring in Michael Herban, please? Thank you very much, Eric. Michael.
Hello.
Okay. Firstly, how are you and where are you?
I'm doing great, and I am in the Twin Cities of Minnesota.
Where my friend Prince was born, or
That's right.
no, well, next
That's
door
right.
actually. Um,
Yeah.
may I ask you about your disability? I know already, but tell us anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm legally blind due to a genetic condition called retinitis pigmentosa, which is the leading cause of blindness. Um, what that means is that I'm not totally blind. When I tell people I'm blind, I say I'm legally blind, which I am by definition. Um, but I do have about 2% of the vision of a normally sighted person. So where that 2% is directly in the central field. Um, and so if I hold out my arm, my fist at arm's length, and I just look at the size of my fist, that's about as much as I can see. Okay. Everything outside of that, I don't see it. So that's one part of what retinitis pigmentosa or RP can do. And the other part is that I don't have any night vision. And that can mean twilight too. As soon as I start getting into low light levels, I don't see anything. And this started when I was a kid, my vision was fine. And this kicked in my mid-20s. And that's often the case with this RP, is that it doesn't show up initially. It's just something that comes along, oftentimes in your teens, people that develop it. And so it makes getting around a bit challenging, but I consider myself extremely lucky that I have that 2% still. Um, and I it was never a given that I would still have that much. I learned about this in my mid-20s, like I said, and I'm in my mid-50s now, and I still have vision left. I'm very, very happy that I do.
So there's no way of actually getting that vision back or stopping it.
No. No, I mean there's some promising research that's being done with RP, but it's a genetic problem. Basically, you have two kinds of cells in your retinas. You have rods and cones. And the cones are in your central vision, and that's what gives you your acuity. But they're not very good with low light. Whereas the rods are the ones that are all through the periphery of your retina, and they're what give you your night vision and your peripheral vision. And it's the rods in the RP that are gone. They just don't function. Um, and so as long as the cones are there, then I have a little bit of vision left. But
I mean, to the novice or to the person looking at this whole subject of birding, you kind of think, well, birding, you need your eyes. They're the most important thing,
yeah,
aren't they? And
no.
I led a tour. I mean, I led a tour a few years ago in Scotland, and there was a lady on this tour who had challenged, her vision was challenged. She had tunnel vision, and she was very frustrated because she couldn't look through the telescope very well and couldn't see things. And I
Yeah.
was as patient as I could be to show her where things were. And I became friends with her. She's a woman in her 70s now. And I spoke to her the other day, and she said, I volunteered at a local nature reserve, but I think I'm done now. I find it so frustrating. I can't. My sight's got worse. You know, what what can you say to someone suffering like that?
Yeah, I understand, and you have to try to take a different tack. So what happened, it was interesting. I discovered birds in my mid-20s. I was in graduate school at the time, and studying physics, which is what I do for a living. And I noticed a bird in the park and I just got obsessed by it and had to go to the bookstore and get a book and figure, what is this? I need to know what this bird is. And ever since, I've just been totally obsessed with them. And and then I met my wife, who was a biologist, and she was a big time birder. And I mean, it was, oh, great. Now we have this. This is my hobby going forward. And it was about a year or two after that that my vision started going bad. And I thought, wow, this is just wonderful timing. And
How did you initially,
when I have this,
when your vision started going, how did you initially feel?
well, I didn't like it at all. And it was a subtle change. It wasn't a total break. I mean, it was something that had been sort of developing over time, and there'd be little hints. But when I finally put it together, I had driven my car into a fence one night, and it's like, where did that fence come from? And just things started adding up, and I went to the ophthalmologist, and got the visual field test, and he looked at my, did a scan and all this, and came back and said, "Yeah, no, you got a big problem here." No, I was devastated by it, and my reaction with the birding was that, 'cause I was in my mid-20s, we just started a family, just started a career, and I kind of took the attitude like what Paul was saying is that, well, I'm going to go conquer stuff. I'm just like, I'm going to use this to the whatever ability I have. My eyesight's already bad. It's going to get worse. So while I've got it, I'm going to use it and I'm going to try to go out and get as many birds as I can. And that was a little hard to do in my 30s with a family and everything. But as we got older and our kids got more independent, my wife and I did a lot more international travel. And then we really got the bug to go neotropical birding, and we would be doing that all the time. And it sort of became my goal after a while that, I'm going to get half the world's birds one way or the other, just as a way to spite this stupid disease I have. And yeah, so I started running into the frustration as my vision got worse. We'd go on these neotropical trips. And if you're birding in a dark forest in Ecuador somewhere, and you're looking for these skittish little tapaculos and furnariids and antbirds and just these birds just don't want to be seen. They're bad enough for people with good vision. And I'd be standing there with a group of people and with a guide, and everybody else would be like, "Yeah, okay, we finally got that antbird," and it's like, I didn't see it. And I'd make the guide would stick around for another hour trying to get me on a single bird that everybody else got, and I'd never get it. And I was frustrated. I was ready to stop. I threw down my binoculars at one point and said, "I'm never doing this anymore. This is just too frustrating to spend this money and not see these birds." And it occurred to me after one of those trips that the whole time I was looking for this particular antbird, it's singing its head off. And it was just driving me crazy because it's like it's mocking me with this song. And then it occurred to me, well, yeah, all right, I get it. I'll just record you. And if I can identify your voice, I was never happy with the idea that the guide said, "Oh yeah, that's a, black-crested antbird that's singing. You can tick that off your list." No, I can't do that because you identified it. I have to identify it. And then I decided I go a step further. I need to record it. I need to get a quality recording that I can put on Xenocanto or somewhere and say, "Yeah, I can verify that that was this bird. I didn't see it, but I recorded it." And that kind of gave me new life on this, to the point where, all right, not only am I going to kind of switch over to birding by ear, I'm still going to try to see it. Obviously, I try to see as many birds as I can, but I've learned to accept the fact that a bird doesn't want to be seen by me, but I got to get its recording. And so that's given me a way to appreciate them. And not only that, but if you go out and you make serious bird recordings, like I said, you can contribute those to somewhere like Xenocanto, Repository, some online libraries. People use these recordings for research. You're really contributing a lot back to ornithology by doing that. And that really ticked the boxes for me. And it's kept me very happy to be a birder, and I found a way to get around this challenge that I have.
So you have to rely on your ears more. Have you found that your hearing has become more acute, or you've become more attuned to your hearing?
I don't know that it's gotten any more acute. It's just that I have to focus on it more. But if it's not like, and this will kind of go to some comments I saw in the chat, because another, common disability that people develop, especially as you get older, is your hearing is going to get worse. And, my own hearing, not only is it not more acute, it's definitely worse than it was 10 years ago. I'm really losing my high frequencies. So for example, you know, last month I came across this huge flock of waxwings, cedar waxwings. And it's, hey, yeah, great. I'll get a good recording of them. And it's like, oh, it's too bad they're not making any noise. They were making all kinds of noise. I couldn't hear it, because they had this real high pitch. And, I pulled out the microphone anyway, and it's like, all right, I'm just going to, maybe they'll make some sound. And I came back and I looked at the recording later, and it's just full of all these waxwings singing. So, to kind of get to that point, yeah, when you're hearing, if you lose your hearing or your hearing deteriorates, yeah, I mean, it is robbing you of a certain kind of experience outdoors. But, again, if you go the step of making recordings, and believe me, it becomes a hobby in and of itself. It's almost like birding squared. I mean, it's like separate from birding. It's like, oh, I need to go record some birds today. I don't, even care what they are. And it's very addicting, and there's a lot of interesting equipment to buy. And so all I can say is embrace the technology. We've already had a few people talking about the technology that they need to get them out. If it's a physical disability, et cetera. But when it comes to hearing and vision, it's like, yeah, make use of those technologies also.
Very good point. Okay, listen, let me quickly switch now to Bo Berlin. Thank you very much, Michael. We'll come back to you. Hello, Bo.
Hi, David.
And Bo is, well, a good friend of mine, known you for a long time, but how are you and where are you?
Well, I'm in Margate in Kent in England, which is as far southeast as you can get without becoming French. And how am I? I don't know, a bit frustrated by tonight, I guess, because you're great people. You've got a wonderful attitude. I haven't. I mean, having a disability pisses me off. I mean, I'm angry about it. I've always been angry about it. Not angry to the extent that I change a huge amount about it, but angry that the world is built in such a way that it is unconcerned, doesn't notice, doesn't give a damn, ignores, is unaware, all those, negative things. And yeah, I've met some great people who are very positive and are caring and are trying to make a difference and all the rest of it. Trouble is, I guess my disability, I've got a thing called ankylosing spondylitis, which is continuous sort of curvature of the back, which is an arthritic thing. I started when I was about 19, so I've had this well over 50 years, and it's got gradually worse. It affects every joint in the body, so I get stiffer and stiffer. And if I'm sat down most of the time, most people look at me, I'm not disabled. And that's sometimes an advantage, sometimes a disadvantage. I'm not patronized, but my needs are ignored. So, there's sort of always both sides of the coin there. It's got worse over the years. I got less and less ambulant. I use a walker when I go out, well, a rollator, as you Americans call them. I think with wheels like a Zimmer frame, which gets me around because I can sit on it when I need to stop and sit, which is one of my big bugbears for reserves, preserves, nature trails and things, that are not places to sit, which an awful lot of people with hidden disabilities need. And I've also progressively deaf. I started, it wasn't until one of my earphones fell out on my iPod one day, and I thought it wasn't one, the other wasn't working. I realized I was completely deaf in one ear, and I'm gradually losing hearing in the other due to another disease, which I seem to attract like magnets. And all of those things compromise birding. I'd also pick up on things said earlier about it is my happy place. It's always been my happy place. It's tranquility has always been incredibly important to me. Apart from all sorts of other things I've done in my life, when I was a kid, I dislocated hips and was, in hospital for yonks, and then couldn't walk anywhere. And my dad used to take me fishing down to the side of a lake, and he could just plonk me down and I'd fish all day. And my big moment was when the kingfisher landed on my fishing rod, and you know, that was it, turned on forever to birds. But he'd always in my ear all day long. He was telling me about the trees and the mice and everything else going on. So I was like David from almost from birth or beyond. I was completely inundated with nature and a love of it, and it has been my saviour. What you were saying, Virginia, about where you were amongst the bird time. My time was visiting my sister in New Zealand, and there's a little island in Auckland Bay called Tiritiri Matangi, and they took all the rats and everything else off, and they gradually it's come back into being just this wonderful reserve, and you can sit there as I did, like Sir Francis of Assisi, because the birds will come to you and they will sit on you, and they don't care about humans. They'll go about their thing, and that for me is, you know, if I had to end up anywhere and there was a heaven, that's where it'd be for me. So I can relate to those things too, and I can relate to somebody who wrote on the chat here about losing the hearing, and you know, what do you do about it? I haven't found a solution to that, I'm afraid. But then I was never much of an audio bird. I can't recognise much bird song. Since I've got hearing aids, I found that the sounds of some birds is modulated to the extent I can actually hear it, and I never heard it in my life before when I was hearing, because they were such high pitch. So there's a sort of semi-advantage there, if you will.
Yeah, we'll get onto hearing in a second, actually. But do you think part of your anger, or you know, not being happy with the situation you're in, is because of the fact that you're in Britain? Do you think that if you were in America, because it seems like the guys that we've just spoken to have a much better kind of standard of care there, it seems.
I've been, I've travelled quite a bit, and places like Canada and New Zealand, Australia, the States. Yeah, they do make concessions for disability in lots of ways. They wheelchair users anyway get a lot of concessions. Some places will have concessions for other disabilities, but it's fairly minor. I mean, in the UK, yeah, it is bad, and it's partly because it's an old culture with old buildings, and therefore, you know, are you going to look after the architecture and 1,000 years of history, or are you going to let somebody in on a ramp, you know, and build that in? And it's that sort of toss-up makes us, you know, very conservative with small c as well. In the UK, there's, as far as I know, there's just one reserve that has a tap rail anywhere for people with sight problems. So, I mean, this is boardwalks around a bit of wetland where you can actually tap the side and not fall off. Everywhere else in the UK, you'd fall in the water if you can't see. So there aren't many. I mean, I've been hitting my head against this wall for 25-ish years and complaining bitterly, and in high places occasionally. I mean, I've got invited to number 10 to a forum once where all the great and good and me sat talking about, you know, what we could do about disability, and stuff was brought up in the House of Parliament, all the rest of it, and zilch happened. But the worst thing for me, the worst thing, and probably what angers me most, is attitude, and it's the attitude of others. And yes, there's terrific inclusive birders out there, but the majority are just unaware. It's not their fault. I'm not blaming them. They're unaware. Those that are aware, some are sympathetic. Most are just selfish, you know, because they're human beings, and most of us, you know, travel that line with self first, and then family, and then the rest.
Do you think that sometimes? Do you think that sometimes people react in a way towards you because they don't know how to react?
Sometimes, sure, and I'm fairly high profile. I mean, I got a column in a magazine called Grumpy Old Birder, so I'm well known for being grumpy. I'm also, you know, I've got all sorts of presents one way and another, and I write books and all sorts of other stuff, and so I'm known-ish in lots of places, and I'm known to be this bolshy, angry man who, you know, is not happy with the status quo a lot of the time. So yeah, people perhaps react to that. And when they know about what's going on, yeah, there's some out there that are sympathetic towards it. And there's a lot that would do more if they were more aware. But I've noticed it's a roller coaster. You know, awareness happens and then it sort of dissipates, and awareness happens again and it dissipates, and like every generation, as it were, has to relearn all these things.
Yeah. You've got a charity yourself, which is Birding for All. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, again, I set that up 25 years-ish ago, I think. And it was my frustration about not being able to do what I wanted to do. And access was the thing for me, that I can't walk very far. I never could walk very far since this disability came on. The further I walk, the more it hurts and the stiffer I get. And so I get to a stage where I have to turn around and walk back. So I have to judge that every time. How far can I go before I've got to turn back? But there are places I've been overseas where there are wonderful circular trails, and you've got places to sit. I mean, there's some great places in Canada I visited where every 500 yards there's somewhere you can sit and hear the bird song and enjoy yourself, and then move on to the next spot until you've done the circuit and you're back where you started. Things tend not to be built like that in the UK, which is a frustration. Using a vehicle is something that happens in a lot of other places. If you go to Africa, you have to be in a vehicle because otherwise something eats you. But over in the UK, that's anathema. You know, it's not a mobile hide. You're just disturbing everybody else's peace. And of course, sat down. I'm not disabled. I'm just someone disobeying the rules, and I'm not as good as I should be because I'm driving down a track where it's permitted for people with the blue badge. But you know, you shouldn't be, because be fit and able and walking is somehow perceived as angelic, and you know, you're a wonderful human being for doing that. And if you're less than that, then you're something looked down upon.
Yeah, it's interesting because in Spain, where I am an Extremadura, it's all about driving. You can't walk anywhere anyway, and it's better to be in the car than out in the on your legs most of the time, because if you step out, the buses will fly out, fly away, or the waiters, what have you. So you have to kind of be in your car. So it kind of, when I come to England, I'm sometimes frustrated because I can't drive around a reservoir and
Yeah.
stuff like that. But let's briefly talk about hearing, because I was speaking the other day and I came to the conclusion that there are three different types of birders. There are the ones that rely on sight, they're the ones that rely on their ears, and then there's an elite that can have both powers. Hearing is an interesting one. I'm deaf in my left ear, and I've been deaf in my left ear since I was a baby because I had mumps and it destroyed my hearing nerve. So I've lived my whole life hearing out of one ear, and I don't know what it's like to hear from two ears. I have no idea. And I used to be a DJ, and people said to me, "How did you DJ? If you can only hear one, through one ear, how could you mix the records?" And I kind of basically had to modify. I had to basically put the headphone in my ear, my deaf ear, really loud so I can hear the record that I wanted to mix in, but I don't hear it actually. I feel the beats, and when the beats match with what I can hear outside, then that's when I used to mix records. So I kind of learned to get around it. But birding is interesting because I have never been able, especially in forests and woodlands, to pinpoint sound. I just can't do it. I find it very difficult, and probably why I don't really, if given the choice, I prefer to be birding in open spaces than I would be in the forest. I actually been doing some work with a hearing aid organisation in UK, because I've been telling them that many people who are birders, not only in the UK but elsewhere, have hearing difficulties. And they gave me an aid, and I've never worn an aid all my life until very recently, and I put it in, and it was quite interesting because I suddenly began to hear not only things louder but also be able to actually pinpoint or pick out. There's three black caps singing, not just one or a wall of sound behind it. I can actually pick out individuals, obviously if it's not windy. Have you found that we're using hearing aids? Do you use them when you are birding the whole time, or one of those things you only use then? Do you think there's a stigma attached to hearing aids?
Well, there must be, because there seems to be a thing about them getting smaller and smaller, and I can't see that. I'd rather they were huge so everybody could see your death. It makes no sense to me. But I think that's a bit about the whole thing about being ashamed that you're somehow disabled, which is such a nonsense, but it's there. And it stops a lot of older people admitting to the fact that they can no longer do this, that, or the other. And it's the same with hearing. With me, if I do have 2 hearing aids, but if I put one in this ear, it's in order for me to hear in this ear what's going on over that side, because I've only got hearing in one side anyway, and it's minimal, but it does give you that sort of binocular hearing. So I can now know that even though it's difficult to orientate, because I know it's being transferred from one ear to the other to where the sound's coming from, it does help. But I think, again, it's just one of those many disabilities which is not obvious, and needs something like this to raise awareness more greatly, so that people can be enabled to get the most out of what they can do. I mean, I've been around the world quite a lot, and I've only missed out on one bird. And that was a June lark in Namibia, because I couldn't walk over sand or couldn't wheel over it or anything else. So I missed it. But everything else, there was a way of doing it. And it was about adapting to do that. It was about helping the leader of a group focus in such a way that they didn't go to the usual spot where they always saw this that was difficult, but went to a more difficult spot for most people that actually was better for those with walking difficulty or whatever it was. So there's always ways of getting over these things. Not everything and not perfectly. I don't want that any more than any of you want it to be absolutely 100% perfect, just better, just more responsive.
Okay, and finally, what is the definition of a disability? What makes you a disabled person? I mean,
Interesting. And I think, I've always taken the social model of disability, which is actually, don't focus on the disability, focus on why society can't cope. Why is it that walking or wheeling is a problem? It's a problem because we have stairs. It's a problem because we have 2 narrow doorways, etc., etc. They're all social things. And if we were a society that was ramped without stairs to start with, wheeling would be a lot less of an issue. But there are all sorts of other stuff that goes with disability that doesn't get taken into account. The need for decent toilets, the fact that people have to stop more often, the stuff that has to be slower, stuff has to be more focused. As Michael was saying, he can only see a small amount in front, and that's where he needs to look. And in a sense, that's what society should be doing. They should, be focusing in on those things and helping with those things. I think where disability is what you think it is. And unfortunately, most people, it's someone in a wheelchair. That's disability. That's all there is to it. There's nothing else that counts, as it were.
okay, well, listen, we've had a fantastic hour of talking about disabilities, and I am totally and utterly inspired. I think it's absolutely incredible how people can, make the best out of really, to other people, really terrible situations. But I'd like to thank all of you guys for coming along and speaking so frankly. For those watching this now, or even in the future, there's going to be a Q&A straight afterwards, but you can only watch it if you become a member of the Urban Birder World community. Think about it, because it's going to get very interesting after we end this. So listen, thank you very much again. Thank you, Zoomers, for being involved and being here. And as I always say, keep looking up.